refuge and bodhicitta from in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until enlightenment. Through the merit of generosity and the other perfections, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. Until in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until enlightenment. Through the merit of generosity and the other perfections, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until enlightenment. Through the merit of generosity and the other perfections, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. A few minutes of shamatha, using the method of your choice. So for those of us who are following the schedule for the year as reset by the India seminar, or either have started or are about to start Vajrasattva, probably have started Vajrasattva. How many people are on that run at the moment? You're on your own. You're on your okay, and you're on your own. So far. Okay. Well, for convenience, I'm using the the arbitrary starting point of this this January as a cycle. So there's a little bit of there's more emphasis on the practice of the quarter, and this quarter it's Vajrasattva or Dojjasempa practice. And one of the things that I want to check on in this moment of transition is any reports on how it's gone so far, any questions, whether they're meta questions or detail things left. I got all the way through refuge and prostrations, bodhicitta, but I never, whatever that might be, or however you might. Well, I don't want to presuppose what a meta question might look like, but larger things. So any luck with the printing, Linda? Any luck with the printing? It doesn't like my document. Well. Well, we can always resort to photocopying and get to that spot. We have backups. So, in any case, do you have anything to report? Did you notice that you did any practice? Well, let's just start with that. Did you notice you did any practices? Okay, well, all right. Let's we'll start there. We'll start with the obvious and then go from there. You look like you're about to have a question.
I'm not exactly sure what my question is. I'm finding that in the practice text that we have.
In the practice text that we have.
In the practice text, I'm finding contemplating impermanence and karma and the faults of samsara are very conceptual for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to other texts, including Ringu Tukul Rinpoche's, and which is a lot more words, but I'm moved by then how he, and I found something online, like I'm moved by karma or faults of samsara, which then helps me do the Vajrasattva practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because then I have some, like, it gives me momentum or gives me fuel, or like, I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta practice this right now. Because my concepts are, well, my mind is so full of pollutive concepts all day long. So I'm wondering, may I skip or exchange more detailed?
What do you think?
Okay. Well, I'm doing it.
So you're this is ask for forgiveness as opposed to permission?
Ask for permission.
Well, you can have both forgiveness and permission. The text, what's in the Wondro text is only slightly more elaborate than a couple of word bullet points. remember how good you got it, and that includes having the Dharma. Not going to last. Be careful what you do, what you say, what you think. Has consequences, and be careful what you put your trust in, because a lot of it doesn't work out. So, like, however you elaborate that, this is the four thoughts are definitely sort of accordion style contemplations, and depending on the time that you have available, you lean into one or another. And if all you did was kind of press the play button on a recorder, and it just sort of recited the things for you, we can be not so far off from that in terms of our recitation, and that obviously is not the point. So anything that we do that brings those things to life, and particularly the things that we do as we're going through life, where we're noticing, how's this fit? Is this working or is this not working? Does this make sense or not make sense in relationship to the things that I've contemplated? So yes, it's actually better to do what you're doing. So Bruce, at some point you'll want to pick up a Mahamudra text on the back there, and at some point we're going to see what kind of lottery we won on the printer. Which one? Yes, Peter.
So I'm kind of on the like flip side of that coin, which at times I read the text and I incorporate the general outline of the practice. So like, for instance, very broadly, the four thoughts that, move your mind to enlightenment. Hey, really trying to purify here. Thanks, 100-syllable mantra, the single line mantra. Oh my gosh, I'm certainly a vow breaker. Thank you for listening to me. Have a good day. So it seems like intent is important, but if you don't recite the text exactly, am I, failing? Am I falling short with that approach?
Yeah, well, here we have it. You can't do this perfectly, and the attempt to do it perfectly will result in a different kind of imperfection. And so if we very carefully, we could get the exact pronunciation from some Tibetan that we really esteemed and recite it just so that absolutely everything was totally perfect. And of course, we're missing something because we haven't actually engaged. On the other hand, the corral in that case is too small and too one-dimensional. But if we make the corral really, really big, we end up just wandering around. So usually we have to do quite a bit of what we think inspires us, and also some amount of that which we think is too constraining, it's too narrow, or it's something so that we actually can, so we can actually keep track of the kind of the outline. So we have a sense of the outline, and we don't lose little pieces along the way. It's actually very easy to do that over the years, to have certain kinds of things, and somebody asks a very basic question about some little piece of a sadhana, and I realize, oh, I just kind of I've been riding right over the top of that and not really paying attention. So sometimes you really have to get the metronome out. It goes tick tock, and you try to make sure you get all the beats. So it's a balance. But no matter how we try to do it perfectly, we'll introduce something, and that will just be part of the blend over time. And another question.
This is more kind of grasping, not an attachment, but so, you know, in the refuge tree, right, there are the Yadams who are deities. I read a biography of Lung Chenpa, and it talks about Vajrasattva kind of just coming into existence, you know, non-dual with, you know, I think Vajradhara is there first, right? And so one part of my question is, I believe the Buddha said there are no gods, right? But yet in this pantheon of aspects of the Buddha mind, right, there are these deities, Vajrasattva being one of them. So that's one question I have. And the other thing is this idea, this practice, and I like this practice, right, because I'm a vow breaker. My gosh, you know, thank you, lineage, for somewhat accepting me, and you know, and so on. But
finally, a party I can belong to.
Well, right, or just, you know, they're letting me in the back door kind of thing. But karma, right? You know, we own our karma, right? There is no, you know, there's not this concept of forgiveness, but yet, you know, we're doing this practice, which I think is like purifying our karma. So those are two kind of questions that I'm grappling with.
Okay. Let's kind of save the second one for when we veer more directly into Vajrasattva. But the first one, I don't know that the Buddha said there were no gods. As I recall, references to sort of a creator or a god that is actually in charge, that is running things, as opposed to the karmic engine. That, I think, is something there. But even in the story of Buddha's enlightenment, is it Vishnu? Yeah, it's Vishnu who says, dude, you can't keep this to yourself. You've stumbled onto something really good here. You've got to do something with this. So there are all kinds of ways that you can hear references to deities, and I tend to try to not use the word myself, because there's, I think, a lot of confusion is introduced by using the word. It has confusion has a lot of tag-along relatives that come to stay when you invite it in, and it's hard to sort out how you're using the word. So I.
What word do you, or what concept do you use?
Yeah, I tend to go for yidam or bodhisattva, depending on which aspect. Buddhas and bodhisattvas, and that has more of a sense of the meaning of it for me than deity. Or yidam, if it's really having to do with how that's more related to a particular way of engaging in practice. So part of it is how, where is the practice going? How is the terminology supporting the practice? But the practice is kind of the core of it, not some sense of a cosmology. I think that's my summary statement, was kind of an inside out, or it's more of an inside out view, and then the words settle on things from the sense of the practice, as opposed to this external map of reality which has this in it, and then what's my practice? My practice is not the leftover space in the middle of this cosmology. It's actually kind of the core.
I asked you a similar question to that once, And my memory was that you said something like, because I've said, well, are deities real? And of course your response was, well, what is real?
Mm-hmm.
You know, am I real? And so I like the way now you're saying, look at it from the inside out, from the practice out. So don't try and construct a worldview, but rather start from the practice, and you will learn through time all the ways you've mistaken things as either being real or not real, when the reality is much more subtle than either of those.
Yeah. I often, I came up with a clever line, and I like it so much that I keep saying it. If people ask me, what do Buddhists believe? I say, as little as possible and less as time goes by. Because it more is a matter of direct discovery. But there are some fundamental principles, and probably the main ones have to do with interdependence and karma. And those are real core things. If you can't live with those, then the Dharma is probably not going to work too well. But if those actually seem really kind of, well, that sort of center of gravity statements about my life in the world and everything I know seems to fit with that there are consequences, everything is very connected, then it goes from there.
Your reference to karma, does that include reincarnation then? Like, I mean, people in this lifetime can kind of see karma, right?
Yeah.
I have had this discussion with some friends, and I kind of think that it would be hard to practice if you don't really buy into reincarnation on some level.
That's one of the perennial questions, and I'll try not to go into it in much length because we will no doubt continue to talk about this for years, lifetimes probably. Lifetimes, yes. I'll get back to you in your next lifetime on this one. The broader the view of the implications of our actions, I think the better. The more we take the limits off that, and the more we take the limits off of kind of a starting spot for how things have come to this point, I think that works better. That works better. I don't think it's, one of the ways that it's workable is to make a kind of a very clear sort of model that says, I have this life, I have that life, and I will have that life. That's one way to make that model work in a very kind of concrete way. But I think it's more subtle than that, as any kind of generalization seems to not hold water after a certain point. So I think it can be too tight, but it can be entirely workable. That would be my point, is that perspective. I think it seems that it's been very workable for a lot of people, a lot of practitioners over the millennia, without much question about it. But for some people, including myself, a very kind of rigid sense of that doesn't work that well. I have to have something that's kind of a broader sense than a very specific thing. But there is actual active research into this, and I was just reading about something the other day where the research now is at a point where you can say there is enough of a body of evidence in terms of anecdotes, kind of carefully investigated anecdotes. There's enough there that there is a body of anecdotes that don't easily that can easily be explained away, and there's less evidence that it's not so. Nobody's actually created a body of evidence but of course proving the negative is always that's the fool's errand. That's very hard. So I think it's possible to have a more open sense of that. Volker Rinpoche himself at one point said, of course I can't prove reincarnation. I don't have any way to just nail it down and prove it. He said, but the more I practice, the more it seems to me that that's the case. And this is a lineage holder, kind of, and he's not wagging his finger and saying, get with the program, you better believe this. So that attitude and the way he related to the question created a lot of space for me.
I have found in Ringo Tukul's book on when he talks about karma, he says anything that we do with strong feelings and emotions is incorporated into our mind stream, becomes our way of thinking and reacting, and it reinforces our emotional and thought patterns, becoming part of our personality. And then he talks about how, so then, circumstances will collide, and then boom, there's that pattern again. And I am so experiencing seeing this, and just wanted to kind of share that I had 2 weeks while doing the Vajrasattva. I was so angry all day, all night. I think I probably slept angry. It was like so painful, and it was like everywhere I looked, circumstances were coalescing into my anger, and it was so difficult. And then one evening I was doing Vajrasattva, and I wept through the whole thing. I was like angry, and then I wept through the whole thing. But it was like the anger was a fever or something, and it's not that I'm not angry anymore. It's clearly a pattern that's there that crops up, but it's like it's so such a acid, hot fire that as I'm just really struggling with anger through this Vajrasattva. Any advice would be helpful.
We have to ride the horse we're on. So kind of relaxing with the fact that that's what's coming up is I think that's important. And it's important not to feel like this is some kind of proof that I've screwed things up. I spent almost 2 months on retreat once in that same state. And so I had nothing much to, nobody was bothering me at the office, nobody was burning my meals, nobody was, yeah, it's funny in retrospect. it actually got to the point within a week or so, the end of the retreat, I got to the point where I was just, I was waxing eloquent to myself about all kinds of stuff, and not about it, but just mainly about, you know, like what an absolute idiot, and it was sort of like I was speaking so loudly to myself internally that it was sort of metaphorically, you could say, or it's almost a felt sense of all my friends and acquaintances showed up, and at first they're kind of listening, and I'm like, what does he have to say? Then after a while, they're just kind of rolling their eyes at me and saying, "You're really, you know, this is not very convincing." And kind of laughing, and they're, you know, it's just, you're just not that bad. And that was where the kind of the anger was kind of wrapped up in kind of this resistance and all kinds of stuff. It didn't have a real kind of theme like that. It didn't have that. But eventually it broke, and it was a little bit like a fever. But it was just something. It was a pattern that was going to roll for a while. Yeah. And sometimes a particular practice session will be the catalyst for something shifting. But we can't, it's almost like we shouldn't tell these stories, because then somebody will go, "Oh, I'll take two Vajrasattva mantras and I'll call you in the morning." You know, like it should be gone. It should go away if I just do this one thing. Then the expectation arises. So, but this is more like, yeah, this stuff can happen. Stuff can happen like that. The more we can kind of stay at the helm in the middle of the storm, just hang on to the wheel as best we can, just steer, try not to harm others, try not to harm ourselves. Sometimes it's just that. And then going through a few storms with that kind of sense of, actually, I'm not going to be able to make the storm stop. Like, I can't just like stop it like that. But to be able to sail through, then something shifts. It's not as I won't say it's not as dramatic. It's not the same kind of sense of tragic failure. That can go away, and just that sense of that, okay, here I am, hanging on for dear life, steering as best I can. Perhaps we can go on from here, now that we've entered the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. How many are not familiar with the Vajrasattva practice at all? Okay. Low, okay. And I will go through it in some detail, but first I want to talk just a little bit about purification. And then I'll keep in mind just how big the parentheses should be when I'm referring to actually to the practice. So I'll try not to leave you in the dust, so to speak. if we have really shifted our attention and opened our heart to some extent in the refuge and bodhicitta practice, we've kind of set a direction. It's easy to discover, and even if we're just sitting down to meditate in calm abiding, it's easy to discover that we can't just say we're going to do this and then we just sail off in the right direction without any veering left or right, or even the sense of, actually, I'm going backwards. So the notion of purification really has to do with meeting this conundrum of, well, I set my mind to this positive direction. I set my mind to the intention to just allow it to settle. I set my mind to the intention to generate loving kindness. Why isn't it happening? There's a certain amount of momentum. There's a certain amount of karmic weight. There's a lot of sort of anchors that we're holding on to that we actually have to deal with. And so the practice of purification has a lot to do with letting go of those anchors, letting go of those patterns. But there's something that's distinct in this, in the approach to purification within the Dharma in general, and specifically within Vajrasattva. Purification, generally we would think of like getting the dirt out of something, getting rid of the dirt. Stopping certain kinds of things. So there's a bailing. And if we've really looked carefully at our own mind stream, and we think perhaps even a bit too self-critically, it can look like there isn't anything that I shouldn't get rid of. I talk to myself too much. I gossip about others in my mind too much. I just, without even moving a finger, I can just watch this. This is a bad sitcom. So you can have the feeling that, I would like, if I really was effective at jettisoning all this, I would be nothing. I would like kind of this little shadowy figure, sort of something like like pouring water on the Wicked Witch in the Land of Oz, and just dissolves, and that would be it. But the sense is that there, behind these veils, behind these obscurations, there is something that is profoundly pure and powerful. And so the frame of reference within Vajrasattva practice and within all purification practice is actually making way for that, for the profound purity that's there, which is not a kind of a zero level. It's if you're binary, you're getting rid of you're not just winding up at zero, having gotten rid of the negative one, and you just wind up at zero. We're basically going from -1 to +1 right in the spot. So it's like 100%. So the notion of purification actually has to do with Buddhahood. That's actually the notion of purification, and it's not so much just the notion of getting rid of. That's one piece of it. But if we look at the instructions in the Torch of Certainty, has a list of things to do, and they're like the 6 methods of remedy. And they all have to do with, 5 of them have to do with doing positive things. that really have to do with doing actively doing positive things, associating our mind with the Dharma, reciting mantra, reading Dharma books, taking care of, beautifying a stupa, or just things that really are associated very much with the Dharma. And the sixth one is having confidence in Buddha nature. So that's a sort of actively cultivating confidence in Buddha nature is part of this aspect of remedy. So I just wanted to emphasize that side a little bit, because I think particularly from kind of the winds, the breeze that blows from the way that we relate to, say, psychological counseling, where we show up with something that is really bothering us, and we want to kind of, can't I just like throw it overboard? It's like I throw it overboard, but it seemed, but it was handcuffed to my wrist and it took me underwater. So I can't do it. So give me some help on how I'm going to throw this thing overboard and get rid of it. But it's not really like, we don't go to the counselor and say, I read about the Buddha, and this sounds like a good job description. Let's do it. So we have this notion of the getting rid of, as opposed to the identifying with the profound positive. And even the word Buddha, particularly in Tibetan, there is the aspect of all negative tendencies exhausted. All positive possibilities come to fruition. So it has that quality to it. So I just wanted to lean to the side of kind of remember the positive side of this, and within the practice, and for just the very thumbnail for it. This is the parentheses that people who know the practice don't really need, but the thumbnail of the practice is with basically the Buddha above our head, the form of Vajrasattva, in the form of Vajrasattva, then to be filled, basically taking our body to be like an empty vessel and to be filled over and over again with this amazing pure nectar, the essence, you could say the essence of bodhicitta, the essence of active expression of Buddha mind, to be filled over and over again. And then all the negativities kind of flowing out, but that notion that we're filled completely, and in the end, 100%. And then even the Buddha in the form of Vajrasattva melts into light and says, we're inseparable. Like, don't forget this, we're inseparable. That's the true nature of things. So that's kind of a 100% statement of it. It's not like, well, yeah, you've worked through a few things today, but come back tomorrow and work through some more. We have to do that work, of course. We have to do the work involved in the 4 powers. How many people know the 4 powers? Okay, all right. The 4 powers. This you can find various places, but this is most of the 4 powers are on the other side. Now, don't forget, you actually do have patterns, and you can work with them, and there are some things to give up, and it's good to have kind of a clear recognition of those things and actively work on them. So the 4 powers, first of all, is to be able, having contemplated karma and interconnectedness enough that we can identify what is fruitful action and what's not fruitful. And in our experience, to be able to see what is working out, kind of what are good things to cultivate, and what are things that are really did not work, better give it up, even though it seems to be my only trick for dealing with this situation. Actually, I'd better give it up. So the first one is having actually some sense of regret about the things that we do that are problematic. So regret is the first one. And this is not guilt. It's not sitting around feeling guilty, though the explanation in the Tibetan is always, very often you find it's like, if you found out that you had inadvertently swallowed poison, you would regret it. You wouldn't feel guilty. You would just like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. So it's that kind of, that's bad move. And then the second one is to resolve that, having identified the poison, I'm not going to continue to drink it. So just making kind of, and this is not rocket science. It's not. It's really obvious, and I don't think any Buddhist teacher would say, this is the secret thing that Buddhas understand and nobody else. This is proprietary. We've patented this. No, this is just really obvious, and it's stuff that we should. But the Buddha said, yes, you should do some of the obvious stuff. You really should. You should do it. And in this, with this resolve, then there's the aspect of turning towards that which we are inspired by as positive example. So going for refuge, turning our attention actively to practice, whether it's calm abiding, whether it's the mind training, generating relative compassion and bodhicitta, recalling the example of the Buddha, to recalling the example of teachers, just constantly turning our attention to that. And then to actively apply antidotes. So, and those are the six items that Jamgon Kongtrul listed of doing positive action and recalling Buddha nature were the main things. But there are all you can read at some length, particularly in first turning teachings, Srimad teachings, about renunciation and how to actually apply when anger arises, cultivate loving kindness. You actively, when jealousy arises, contemplate the limitations of getting stuff as something to rely on, and to cultivate rejoicing that other people are actually finding some satisfaction. And so you can go through all those lists of antidotes, but the associating with our minds with Dharma things and recalling, cultivating confidence in Buddha nature, those are primary. So that's it's more of a positive outlook than just solely getting rid of negativity.
This is a lot of off-cushion.
Yes. Right. Yeah. The four powers are really something to be engaged in off the cushion. There may be times when we're doing Vajrasattva practice, doing the formal practice, and something in particular will come up. And then it's necessary to identify that as, oh, I'm identifying this one particular tendency or this one act. It's clear in my mind that this was not a positive act. Then we can kind of bring it to bear. But it's the practice itself should not be a cataloging session. The practice really is more focused on just that sense of purification, letting go of the anchors, feeling the things flow out and disappear, and feeling filled with the purity of Vajrasattva. Should we take a very brief break in case you need one? Just a stand up and stretch. Do whatever is necessary. We don't have all that long, so I don't want to.